Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Hi. Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's plenary, Place-Based Observance, 400 Years of Inequality and Urban Sustainability. Very, very small housekeeping detail at the end of your sessions today. We invite you to go back to the registration area where groups of people will make their way to the evening banquet program. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to particularly find your way there alone, show up in the registration area following the end of the sessions, and we'll make sure you get there. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee peoples. We acknowledge the many indigenous nations with ties to this land, and we recognize that the Lenape still call Manhattan and Brooklyn home. Today's speakers will address the work of the 400 Years of Inequality Movement and Coalition. We welcome, where are they? Tim Nottage. Tim, you want to wave for us? Jackie Castaneda and Adita Nair, along with Dr. Mindy T. Fullilove. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Fullilove and perhaps even use her written work in your courses or in your personal growth, and that's wonderful. What's really wonderful is the work of this coalition and movement that has brought together quite a number of people who are participating. Today we're privileged to have three folks in addition to Mindy. Tim Nottage is an urbanist and designer with a focus on environmental justice, public space, and storytelling, but has a background as a scenic designer, theater artist, and a fabricator, which I think is a wonderful thing for a storyteller. And I once had an HR staff. One person's last name was Ransom, and the other person's last name was Severance. And when I asked them about it, they said, I never noticed. Jackie Castaneda, Brooklyn-based creative urbanist, passion-focused on designing strategies and projects with an integrated approach, and has co-founded CITAD, do you say CITAD? CITAD, a design collective that aims to improve urban experiences for everyone. We also have with us Adita Nair. Adita, you want to wave? Hello. Community architect and urbanist, passionate about housing rights and access in low-income neighborhoods, rental laws, housing policy, and regulations. I think it's really important to know what people are passionate about. I'm also going to share some credential information, but I think we get to know each other best when we find out what it is each of us is passionate about. Dr. Fullilove is a board-certified psychiatrist, sorry about that, who explores the ties between environment and mental health. She received her bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr and her MS and MD degrees from Columbia University, the other doctor in the house. Mindy Thompson Fullilove, MD, has also been awarded honorary doctorates from Chatham College and from Bank Street College of Education. Dedicated to the psychology of place, Mindy's research started in 1986 when she linked the AIDS epidemic with place of residence and continues to focus on health problems caused by inequality. She is extraordinary in her ability not only to conduct research, but to communicate the imperative of her findings. How many people in your life are dedicated to identifying, naming, and organizing change where the sources and consequences of inequality have persisted and wreaked havoc? That's quite a load to shoulder, and we appreciate the work they've done. For the past 30 years, Mindy has been investigating how broken connections between different sections of cities harm public health and explores ways to reconnect them. Now a professor of urban policy and health at the New School, Mindy Fullilove previously taught at Columbia University and previously at Parsons. She's published numerous articles and 6 books, including Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy in America's Sorted Out Cities, Root Shock, How Tearing Up City Neighborhoods Hurts America and What We Can Do About It, all for sale outside on the book tables. And House of Joshua, Meditations on Family and Place. There is a statement in the bioinfo that says, we know now that inequality is a threat to health and democracy. And I think when we talk to our ancestors, they knew that in organic ways. We're living in an era where evidence and data matters greatly, but what it matters more is making sure the stories of people who have endured that truth are having their stories told. I give you our plenary.
Did that work? I think now it's working. Yes. Thanks. We're so glad you're all here. We gave you 2 handouts. And one of them, which is this one, the one that looks like this, it's like the Mad Libs. See the Mad Libs? Yeah. So you're supposed to fill it in. And you can work on this while we're talking. Just, when your mind starts to drift, you can work on this little poem. And without further ado, in 2016, we did the math and we said, oh my goodness, in 2019 it'll be 400 years since the first Africans landed at Jamestown and were sold into bondage. That's an occasion that ought to be marked. And so a group of organizations came together and decided that we would issue a call and invite people to join us in the observance of this occasion. And we thought, because there are many, many ways you could think about these 400 years. But in our conversations, what emerged was that slavery is justified by saying that the Africans are not fully human. And this concept becomes, this lie, becomes embedded in law and custom and continues to be a dominant trope in the world today. And so we thought that it was a good time to talk about inequality. And so we called our project 400 Years of Inequality. And we believe that this concept, this lie, that people are not fully human, gets applied to women, it gets applied to Muslims, it gets applied to immigrants. It gets applied wherever they need to divide us, to oppress us, to rob us, and that we need to throw off the shackles of this concept, which is work that we have to do all together. So I just wanted to say a little bit personally about how I come to this. And as Amy mentioned, in 1986, I started to do research on AIDS. And our first day in the office, we said, we had the charge of looking at excess risk for AIDS among blacks and Hispanics in the United States. It was, where do we start? So we kind of mapped out the territory and started everywhere. But what we found out from the truly seminal paper by Roger Wallace, published in 1988, Synergism of Plagues, was that what was causing this excess risk was horrific urban policy. This work was particularly looking at the policy of planned shrinkage, which closed fire stations in New York City minority neighborhoods and allowed them to burn down. An interesting psychological thing is that to this day, people, when talking about the burning of the Bronx or the burning of Brooklyn, cannot say the 2 words planned shrinkage. We are in a profound societal denial that government would close fire stations and burn people's neighborhoods to the ground. So this sets off, because HIV, although we didn't know it, was already present in the United States, in New York, in those neighborhoods, sets off a massive explosion of the AIDS epidemic, which travels all around the world. This denial of planned shrinkage is, of course, captured in many, many parts of the AIDS epidemic. In our work in California at that time, we were looking at organizational response to AIDS. And as you will well remember, the government refused to say the word AIDS. And so there was no organized response to an epidemic. So what you're supposed to have is a very quick, very immediate, across-the-board response. What we had instead was organizations responding as they came to see that it was relevant to them. This is the root of the AIDS disaster. The AIDS disaster was in a setting of not only planned shrinkage, but as we came to understand, a whole series of urban policies that were leading to the collapse of core urban neighborhoods. And this collapse was radiating out to affect cities and their suburbs all across the United States. In sum, we came to see that this kind of racism and classism had taken on different forms. Certainly slavery, followed by Jim Crow, but then this form that we've called root shock, this serial forced displacement, tearing apart people's neighborhoods, where we find ourselves today, certainly powered by gentrification, powered by technology, powered by attacks on immigrants and many other people. Anniversaries, we believe, have a role to play in trying to begin to conceptualize things differently, understand what's going on. And this is an observation we made when we did a project after 9/11 called NYC Recovers. Our project tackled, and in fact, two of my colleagues from those days, David Chapin and Hirofumi Minami, are here today. Thank you so much. It's great to do that work with you. One part of the project was to look at how should people handle the anniversary. The first anniversary of 9/11 was very difficult for people. It was like the terror would come back. And so we did all these things, and I just want to point out that it's a little faded in this light, but none of the buildings in our logo. So an artist who was displaced from her office drew this for us. So she was sort of in the epicenter of the attack, her workplace. And so out of her feelings of displacement, she drew this logo, and none of the buildings touched the ground. Notice that after a year of this work and dealing with the anniversary, people have figured out how to get the buildings to touch the ground. I thought it was quite remarkable, honestly. And that is the work of anniversaries, that we have stuff that's lingering, right? That's unresolved, that's driving us, and we got to bring it to the surface, we got to talk about it, and we got to be able to touch the ground. And that is the work that we think of as the work of this anniversary, of really thinking about what does it do to a nation to be founded on the concept that a very substantial number of the people aren't fully human, or 3/5 of a human being. That as a pillar of your democracy is what you call an oxymoron. So, with that, I would like to turn the microphone over. And really, it's been a fantastic thing to be at the New School and doing this project, and I've had the real honor of working with designers who are emerging, I think you would say emerging designers? They're not. They're all established professionals, but back in school to get more training and therefore emerging in the field of design and urban ecologies. So I'm going to turn it over to the first of these.
Hello? Yeah, that's good? Okay, now? Yeah. So, hello, I'm Aditi Nair. And I'm pursuing my master's in design and urban ecologies at Parsons. I have practiced in some of the most poverty-stricken regions of India. As a community architect, my practice continuously is jarred by the social inequalities we operate within. This is a picture of my city, Mumbai, where 60% of the population live without a house and forcefully coexist with some of the most privileged populations of India. As an alien non-resident in this country for the past year, I've had multiple experiences of rigid boundary and sweet inclusions. The 400 Years of Inequality project is one such sweet spot. Through the lens of my own experiences, working with the 400 Years project has allowed me to see how appallingly universal this ecology of inequality is. Dr. Fulilav and our amazing team have also shown how beautifully we can come together, face our history, and heal moving forward. Social inequalities are universal. No nation on earth is free of them. 2019 represents a unique year in US history. The year 2019 will mark the 400th anniversary of a pivotal event that shaped the United States for centuries to come. Approximately 20 Africans arrived in Virginia at Jamestown settlement in 1619. Upon this arrival, they were sold into bondage. This moment was the genesis of institutionalized slavery, which became a defining feature of the history of the United States. It was sustained and perpetuated by the economy, law, religion, education, and social structures. The injustice that was committed at Jamestown 400 years ago embedded itself into every aspect of North American society and all lived experiences hence. It has evolved into what we call the ecology of inequality, in which we live today. The 400 Years of Inequality project works to issue and amplify a call for observance of the 400th anniversary of Jamestown. This is a call to build a radically different future. This is the work of unmaking and remaking our world. We do this to denounce structures of inequality. We do this to foreground our fundamental and unconditional equality. We remember. And in doing so, we refuse to participate in and produce structures of dehumanization, exploitation, oppression, and iniquity. We do this by putting out a call. We listen for responses, and we provide tools to hold place-based observances. So what is a call? A call is both straightforward and complex. There are calls for attending, there are calls for joy, calls for suffering. Institutions might call us to attention or for prayer. Our call can be any of these. It is open-ended. It does not have a determined script. It is a non-prescriptive invitation for a non-linear process. Yet nobody does the same thing at the same time. Different situations demand different actions. We are inviting creative place-based actions that tell the story of how different sites, neighborhoods, regions hold this history of inequality while striving for a truly loving communities of care and freedom. This is what you have in your hands, the call. You can also visit our website to read a complete downloadable version of the call. So what's the meaning of the response? Every community has something to contribute. The observance you plan will reflect your local story and your values. An observance can be anything you like: a performance, an exhibit, a tree planting, a citywide potluck, or a concert. In the ecology of inequality, we are all affected in various ways. We should take a moment to situate ourselves in how inequality has impacted our story. How do we experience inequality, and what do we do to resist it? There are many stories that we can tell. Every group and every place has a story. whether it is of dispossession of Native Americans, denial of rights of working people, or the exclusion of Asian Americans. Some of the stories we need to tell and hear are the stories of resistance, of progress, the stories of strikes, sit-ins, elections, and sanctuary. Here are some of the responses that we received over the course of 2 years. I'm going to pick 2 of those stories and tell you about them. In France, the city of Nantes has acknowledged its participation in the slave trade, including by installing a remarkable memorial to the abolition of slavery and focusing the city's museums on telling this horrendous story. Millions of people now visit Nantes to become acquainted with the story. In March 2018, several organizers of 400 Years of Inequality project went to Nantes. And what did we learn? Nantes told its own story. The city shared that it was the leading French principal port in the slave trade, outfitting expeditions that went to Africa to trade cloth and other items in exchange for human beings. Then went to the Americas to sell those people into slavery. The names of these ships and the dates they sailed are represented in the public space. Standing in the port of Nantes and reimagining those ships evoked another era and the ways in which making money trumped human rights. Nantes presented the artifacts of the trade, which depicted the ships and their cargo, not as abolitionist propaganda, but as owners' documentation of their cargo. The artifacts give a much deeper understanding of this global effort. Another example we have here is a World Fellowship Center in New Hampshire, which conducted a research on local legends Limbo, a slave who lived to be 90, and Molly Orchid. This is Limbo's gravesite, where locals have leaf seashells. This is when the New School hosted the 400 Years of Inequality Symposium. And here we read excerpts from Howard Zhunn's Voices of People's History. I'm just going to play this for y'all.
Like Mindy said, I am a writer here at the University for Marketing. And I thought about what I wanted to read, and I figured what would be appropriate is just the opening passage, which is by Frederick Douglass. And it goes as follows.
Can you speak up?
Yes.
Okay.
It's by Frederick Douglass, the passage. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. So onto the, like Mindy said.
So, yeah. So moving on, like, we look at how do we then find our stories and the stories that we are located in. Anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss famously said, "I am the place in which something has occurred." We hope that these exercises and examples help you learn more about the history within the history of the place you live in. To map out meaningful stories within this ecology of inequality, we must learn to listen to the stories around us and the stories within us. In doing so, we see the many ways of our inner and outer worlds are connected and co-created. Inequality works to erase people's stories. So telling and listening to each other, talk about our lives and the places we come from can be a radical act. These activities help you explore and share your own half-told stories. Thank you.
Hello. Well, okay. I want to thank Aditi for this nice introduction, and also Mindy for inviting us to be part of this lecture or conference. My name is Jacqueline Castañeda. I was born in California, but my parents decided to move right away to Mexico again, so I was raised basically over there. I have an academic background in architecture, but I consider myself an urbanist. I work back in Mexico for the Mobility Institute of my city, and also I was part of the first public space of the state. Mexico is a really challenging place to have a practice, an urban practice. As we all know, Mexico has a long history of inequality, of extraction, of violence. It's like a 500 years history to be exact. But I have been working in bringing or promoting spatial justice through my practice, and I'm also an urban farmer here in Brooklyn. That's my picture over there. I'm in my second year of my master's degree of design and urban ecologist at the New School, where I work with Professor Mindy Folilov as a research assistant for the 400 Years Project. And in this first year, I realized that what I was doing in my professional career is to actually interrupt the ecology, trying to interrupt the ecology of inequality which we live in. So that's me. I want to talk about this timeline. We don't have it printed, but it's when we have it printed, it's a really beautiful piece of design. First of all, I want to say that the timeline went through a really deep process of research and reflection of stories and history. It's the anchor point, and it's the launch point for the 400 Years of Inequality project. It's part of the call. So the timeline was created by students of the class 400 Years of Inequality, led by the Professor Mindy Folilov. This class was in 2017 in the spring and fall, and it is based in a close reading of the Howard Zinn's book, People's History of the United States. And this timeline analyzes 4 different histories and their intersections. So it analyzes the African American history, the Native American history, the working people's history, and the women's history. The purpose was to visualize the ecology of inequality, to situate its stories in time and space, in specific neighborhoods, laws, events, moments, and making the connections between these different stories. Here it is. Okay, there is a zoom over there of the same image. So here is an image of this timeline that was on the development process. This is a picture of the 2017 symposium, and we can see here people that is actually, interacting and reflecting of this timeline. So here it is. So the timeline went through a great number of iterations and graphic changes. This last version that we have right now was designed by Tim, our manager right now. So I want to acknowledge him and thank him for this great design. And the most exciting part of the timeline is that when we start to interact with it, we all start to remember, and we all start to see that all stories are intersected. Like there are different stories. So saying that, we also have been working in designing more resources and tools to share and support people to place their observances, to organize and to think about their stories. We have the timeline, we have the 2 starter kits, we have a massive online open course, We have our website, social media. We have been designing some workshops also. I want to talk about the Starter Kit. The Starter Kit 1 introduced to the 400 Years of Inequality project and offers many ways to engage with the project and with history. It provides us with resources to start organizing and plan an observance. We can find in it steps for hosting conversations and guide reflections, advice for building a team and planning, and suggestions for different readings. We can also find in it some educational resources, like, again, the timeline, posters, videos, videos like the one that Aditi showed previously. The Starter Kit 2 focus on how to host a place-based observance and provide with some tools for that process. It provides activities that will help us to investigate our local history, to practice listening, to connect the place where we live, and to explore our own stories. It provides us with ideas, questions, and tips to consider to prepare a place-based observance. So our massive open online course, I always say the words in not the correct order. It is going to be launched in Juneteenth, so if you're interested, you can register also. It is designed in partnership with the New School, the University of Orange, the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and 1DC. And it's 4 modules that will help us to understand the project and to learn about commemorative justice, place-based observance, organizing, and how to build our people's platform. Also, we have, I think one of the strongest tools that we have right now is the website also. It's a tool for people's observance. This is the last version that was launched this last December in 2018, but it's an ongoing project. We have improved it and shaped it accordingly to the needs of the project and the needs of the message we want to communicate. And we can find also our resources here. Where is the? Here we have all our the resources that can be downloads and like products, and also if you want to contact us or talk to us, like it's a way that you can contact us here. We have also our Action Network map. It is a platform that empowers individuals and groups to organize, and in this platform is where we are mapping people's observance around the country and around the world. So I want to talk about a little bit of our process in designing all these tools. Generally, the design process sometimes is very linear, but me as designer, I can see that our process is really collaborative. We always work from the curriculum team to the design team on the or we go backwards, and it's not a linear process. We are always communicating, we are always collaborating, because we want to have more perspectives of the tools we are designing and creating to have like a more powerful a more integral approach for these observances and for these tools. So I think one of the strengths and beauty of this project is the wide range of practices within the different teams and the organizing committee. We have public health researchers, we have musicians, we have visual artists, designers, writers, planners, architects. Like, we are very multidisciplinary, and that enrich a lot the project and the perspective of all the tools we are creating. So I want to end with this. Like, it's something that I have been reflecting, and I think it's very important to highlight that we as practitioners need to reflect in our stories as a person, but also we need to start to reflect in the history of our practice and where it is situated in this ecology of inequality. Thank you.
helps if I turn it on. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thank you so much, Jackie and Aditi and Mindy, for taking us through the project. So my name's Tim Nottage. I am the project manager for 400 Years of Inequality. I graduated last year with my master's from Theories of Urban Practice, which is the sister program to Design of Urban Ecologies. And my interests are in environmental justice, public space, and storytelling mostly. I'm a very interdisciplinary urbanist in an interdisciplinary project. My background is in theater design. So Jackie talked a little bit about the timeline, and I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about it. So the timeline is really one of the core artifacts of the way we organize the project, and a core tool in some of the resources, those free online resources that both Jackie and Aditi were talking about. And the screen is a little bit weird, but you can go on the website and you can see a better quality picture of the timeline. You can download it. It's actually 3 feet by 8 feet each section. This is the first section going from 1607 to 1899, and the following section goes from 1900 to 2017 when the research was completed for the project. And we find that looking at the timeline, we see two things that really pop out. One thing that's really helpful is that we're able to sort of place ourselves, as Jackie was saying, as both practitioners and as people who have our own communities in relationship to the history. Now, there's not every story in the timeline. We couldn't fit every story in the timeline. It's just not possible, but it's great for orienting your story or the story the stories that you see and connecting and finding the intersections. And those intersections are really important because the other thing that we find while looking at the timeline is that coalitions are really valuable in creating social change and fighting for equality. And I'll talk about some of the coalitions in a little bit. Right, so throughout these 4 threads of history in the timeline, people succeed by coming together. So let's start by placing ourselves into the history of the timeline. EDRA, the Environmental Design Research Association, is celebrating its 50th anniversary, its own anniversary. I think this is a great time for you in your practice and as an organization to reflect on what your role is in this timeline, where you came from, what role do you play in the ecology of inequality, and what power do you have to build a better future. And so looking at the timeline, we can sort of understand what are these social and environmental contexts in which EDRA as an organization comes out of, right? In 68 and 69, this is a time of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War protests. This is a time of the feminist movement and the environmentalist movement. This is when the sanitation workers were striking in Memphis, and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated after speaking to them. This is also the time when students protesting the Olympics in Mexico were massacred by the Mexican government directly before the 1968 Olympics. And this is also the time in '69 when transgender women of color lead the Stonewall riots to protest police harassment and violence. And when I talk about, when we look at these examples, I think one of the best coalitions that I identify with as someone who is from California is the Delano grape strike, where Filipino and Mexican laborers realized that they were being divided and used to pit against each other, and they united and were successful. One of the first agricultural labor strikes in United States history was successful in their demands after 5 long, hard years. So where are we today? 50 years later, our society is still embedded in the ecology of inequality. This time, the calls for a just future are coming from the movement for Black lives. It's coming for those fighting for indigenous rights. It's coming for those calling for environmental and reproductive justice, and also for those demanding bold action on climate change. We are all in the ecology of inequality, and all of these are calls to undesign this ecology. So I ask you again, where does EDRA stand at 50 years? What is EDRA for? And what are you as individuals standing for in this history? How will you observe these 400 years? How will you build a just future? We're going to hear from you in a moment, and I want you to really think and sit with these questions because they're heavy questions. But to give you some time to think about these really heavy questions, I'm going to talk about trees for a second. So I've been reading Peter Wohleben's book, The Secret Life of Trees. Has anyone read that book? Yeah? It's really wonderful, and he's describing these incredible scientific discoveries that ecologists are working with, and that trees are really social creatures. Trees form these large social networks, both with each other and fungi, and through their roots and through the emitting of smells, they're able to communicate with one another. And this communication isn't just about warning their neighbors about predatory insects, but it's also about sharing the available nutrients. And it's about working together to create the ideal environment for every tree's survival. Through working together, through sharing the sunlight and the water in an efficient way, they create this cool, moist microclimate of the forest in which each tree has the optimal conditions to live. When a tree's roots are damaged, it's cut off. It can't communicate or collaborate with its other tree, with its neighbors. It becomes vulnerable. When a tree is isolated, it loses all of its best advantages and disadvantages. And when trees like this become isolated, they fall and they open up tears in the fabric of the forest that allow heat and wind to enter into it. In Dr. Fullov's book, Root Shock, she creates the analogy that displacement of humans from their neighborhoods, displacement, isolation, and disinvestment tears at the social fabric and it makes us weaker by allowing us not able to work together, right? As urban and environmental researchers, we know the impacts of isolation, displacement, and disinvestment on urban communities and rural communities. And climate change is already exacerbating this impact. We need strong root systems. We need systems that support those of us in need because we recognize that we are all in this together. So how do we do that? We start, we think, at 400 years by reflecting and telling the stories that have only been half told. We start with listening and reflection practices that think back to our ancestors 7 generations prior and think about the world that we want to build 7 generations in the future. So we've been doing that. We've been holding workshops, we've been creating these free resources and finding that, especially when people are able to tell the history of their own stories in their own places, every place has many stories. Now, to help people find their stories, we've provided you with this handout. We've also released the starter kit and the timeline, all the resources that my other colleagues have already told you about, so I won't go into detail, and are continuing to hold workshops throughout the summer that ask people to reflect on their own local stories. So one last time I ask you, what is EDRA's place in these 400 years of inequality, and how will you observe this anniversary to build a just future? Thank you so much. Now, Mindy is going to come up and lead you through a little exercise. Thanks, Mindy. Yeah, if you didn't receive a handout, please raise your hand and we'll come by and bring you one.
So we handed these out. The great designer Edward Tufte, you know Edward Tufte? He always said, give people a handout and let them write on it. He said, people can't focus on what you're saying the whole time. So perhaps we'd like all of you to, we're just going to give you a couple minutes to fill out this Mad Libs poem.
Okay, great.
And then perhaps we would like to have a few of you read what you've written. Have some of you done it already? Are you ready to? No. Maybe you did, but you just don't want to say it because then I'll call on you. That could be it, right? Do you want to come up? Thank No. Do you know that thing after the exam? When you're done, put your pencils down and look at me. You were kind of looking at me. Are you done? Awesome. Ready to read? Awesome. Good. We'll just give everybody else another minute. You're done too? Awesome. Those of you who are done early can turn the paper over and start working on the observance hosting guide. All right, one more minute. Everybody can keep working, but I'm gonna start, people, so sir, perhaps you'll say your name and.
And what else would you like me to say besides the name?
We would like to ask you to read your
Start
poem.
reading. Okay,
Yes.
fine. So, hi everyone, I'm Todd Brown. Okay, so I'll begin to read. I'm from television, from remote controls and Bluetooth devices. I am from the renovated urban apartment, a product of gentrification. I am from the yucca plant, the thorny honey locust. I'm from Christmas and noise, from Dolores and Tristana, from debates and difference, and from love. I'm from respect and piety and amazing grace. I'm from picnics. I'm from Chicago and black. From fried chicken and salmon croquettes. From a single poor mother with a 9th grade education who homeschooled her children. A perfectly imperfect matriarch who has loved her 9 babies. With memories of birthdays, graduations, and celebrations filled with warmth.
You were finished also. How would you feel about reading? We don't want anybody to feel pressure, but if you're feeling it, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, great. I am from the table, from gardens and light. I am from big, airy old wood. I am from lindens and mycelium, whose long limbs and stems I remember as if they were my own. I am from a singing family and good food, from ancestors and children. I'm from shared meals and quiet walks. I'm from birthday parties. I'm from the creek and responsibility, and I'm my own grandpa singing. I'm from walking in the woods. I'm from Maryland, of German ancestry and fried chicken and fresh vegetables. I'm from my father's early death by asbestos. I'm my own ancestors, and my brothers and sisters are in my heart.
Who else is feeling it?
If you didn't finish, it's okay. You can just read a section.
While everybody's thinking and finishing, we can also open up to questions and comments and observations that you have.
Really?
Yes.
Perfectly. Thank you so much. We really tried very hard to capture. It's, as you might imagine, for us as the organizing committee, the 2.5 years of working on this has been a very deep experience. The ways in which it comes alive for us. But thank you so much for that comment. I really appreciate it. And all of these things, the book Voices of People's History, which is a documentary history of the United States, if you pick it up with friends and family and just pass the book around and read from it randomly, it's very emotional. Or doing this little Mad Libs with people. It does get to the fact that this is in our bodies. You know, not just somebody else's body. My body, all of our bodies. Yeah. Thank you very much for that comment. One of the things that we've discovered is that in this process, you can be both forthright and calm, and which I think are both extremely, extremely important. But obviously, oppression didn't start in 1619. For example, people say, archaeologists say, that the overthrow of the matriarchy and the establishment of patriarchy happened like, I don't know, 50,000 years ago. A long time. It's much longer than 400 years. So patriarchy beat slavery to the punch, but et cetera. And it's not the last injustice to be invented. But, so it's sort of like, well, what is the point of picking this moment in time? And so one of the things that we think is the answer to that is what we've tried to share with you today, is that tell the story of your place, because the story of your place has your time, whatever that is. You know, if it's 15,000 years ago when people came over the Bering Straits, or however they got to the Americas, tell that story. And then that, so in this moment of 400 years, we can tell the stories of the whole of the human race and how we've struggled with this problem of dehumanization. Yeah.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah, just to share why I haven't filled in the paper. I don't have a pen. That's not the main reason. I work for the International Committee of the Red Cross. I've only done that for 4.5 years. And when I first started to work for the organisation, I quite often would say to people, oh, where are you from? Because obviously you meet people from all over the world. And I very early saw this kind of look of confusion in their eyes. And then I had to learn to ask the question differently, which might be, where are you living now? Or where were you born? And this is the first time I've experienced that myself. I looked at the paper and I thought, where am I from? And I thought, I have no idea how to answer that. I have no idea whether to answer that in the present, in the recent past, in the distant past. So I'm still struggling with how to answer it. So it's a really interesting exercise from that perspective as well.
It's always happening to other people, right? And not to us. But the question is actually very complicated. I am from, and then you're supposed to pick an everyday item in your home. And you said television, and I'm forgetting, right? Table, yeah. So, an everyday item in your home. Is there one that comes to mind? The bath. Well, you can't beat the bath. Awesome. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Did you want to say something else?
I was just challenged by your question about the observance of a just future. Sure. And what I work on right now very much is climate justice, because it's so unjust in so many different dimensions. And yet, it seems like that we need some way of together being able to talk about it. It's like we keep trying to solve it, or ignoring it, depending upon who you are, and that doesn't allow us to come together to both share our grief at what's happened, unintended consequences of what we thought was okay and that it wasn't okay, and now that we're going to have to deal with those consequences in some way. And how do we allow ourselves to literally come together and to share the grief, but also to feel the power of the actions that we might take on behalf of ourselves and all the other species on this earth? And this idea of an observance just struck me as being so critical to figure out, how do we make a commitment to the future and to each other in the process of moving forward that we're going to be having to do. And I wondered if you've been thinking at that level of, when you talk about observance, are you talking about the future in this new world that we've actually constructed, and how are we going to be able to bring a just transition about, not just a transition, but a just transition to a new way and a new world that hopefully is not embedded in the kind of injustice that has brought us to this point. Do you have some answers, thoughts?
Sure do. We're full of answers. Should we start with Jackie?
Yeah, well, actually, we were talking about, like, before the panel, like, and Mindy has a great answer, like, just express, like, what is the future you want to see, or what is the future you're looking for. So for me, it's like, through my practice, I'm trying to work for spatial justice and to bring all these tools, and yeah, to have a more just world. There could be so many ways to arrive to it, but for me it's through, as an architect, as an urbanist, it's through spatial justice, and that all my projects had that purpose. Right now it's really difficult, but I'm trying, like, every day, like. And also for me right now, I never thought about stories and history and, like, the impact they could have. And 1 year after, right now, like, I really understand the power of stories in the space. So for me, I'm trying to work on that. So that will be my answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think a lot about how hosting an observance and telling stories is a way of being in right relationship with each other and with the land. And maybe this speaks to this question of this question of where I am from, in that a lot of us maybe don't have the same relationship to land that our ancestors did, and that we're very mobile people, disconnected from land and from each other. And so I think about actually learning from the indigenous teachers, people with indigenous practices alive today, as the leaders, and sort of thinking about what that future might be. And I also think about storytelling as a way of envisioning that future. I'm really inspired by the work of Walide Marisha and Adrienne Maree Brown, who created an anthology of science fiction written by people working in social justice movements, in the idea that all work of social justice is speculative fiction, not science fiction, excuse me, in that you are envisioning a world that does not yet exist and bringing it into being. And I think that's really critical in understanding where is the context that we are in before we envision the world that we want to bring into being.
So before presenting, it was very sweet that you answered this question for us, like, what do you envision? And you directly asked me about what would happen if everybody in Mumbai had a house. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want, you know. So, but thinking about myself as a practitioner who's been in situations where people are not even able to or empowered enough to speak their own stories, I think for me, creating a space like that where everybody can speak and everybody's comfortable to speak their own stories is really, really critical. So I think through our project, a lot of the times I'm thinking, what gives me a platform, myself being a student here, what allows me to speak or what makes me feel good about myself where I'm able to tell my own story? And how would that translate into my practice, where you create a space where people are able to tell their own stories and you make them feel comfortable enough to share, so that you know, as practitioners, as designers.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments about kind of what this exercise meant to me. One of the reasons why I was looking up so early is because I actually completed it at the very beginning of the presentation. So it was the first thing that I did when I got the handout. And so because of that, I had a lot of time to reflect even during the presentations, and found myself constantly looking back at the document, maybe making small edits. Being trained as an architect and an environmental psychologist, I appreciate that the assignment really allowed me to bring out kind of my understandings of place attachment and place identity, and caused me to look at things critically. So obviously most of my research is centered around race and space, so I do consider myself a critical social scholar, but it also, parts of this activity also made me think very deeply and critically about those social identities in terms of what I was writing down. And there was a bit of moments where I had conflict in terms, in terms of psychologically. So for example, it says I'm from, and it says things you were told as a child. I had to remember and be cognizant of my very religious and kind of upbringing, which is why I listed kind of respect and piety. Even though I am atheist now, I've struggled with whether to acknowledge those foundational roots. And I figured, well, yes, this is still part of who I am, growing up in a religious household. And then just issues of race and class, like when it prompted me to list food. I hesitated quite some time thinking about, well, should I write down fried chicken? And obviously this is probably not a conflict that you had, also listing fried chicken, because of those type of stereotypes and biases around it. So just thinking about kind of the interactions and dynamics, both psychologically and socially, with just filling out items. And it was kind of a cathartic experience for me, but it really caused me to think about all of those different levels and layers embedded, within these questions. So, but I really, really do appreciate this exercise.
I think we're coming to 5 o'clock when we're supposed to stop. But I so appreciate your comment, and I just want to say that we're in a pretty disastrous situation in the United States in terms of people with different points of view talking to each other. The thing about anniversaries that we'd really like to leave you with is that they represent reality. Whatever you think about racism or you don't think about racism, it is true that in 1619 a ship docked probably at Point Comfort and 20-odd Negroes got off and were sold into bondage. That's a fact. And that we pause to think about that fact. It is a fact that we wrote into the Constitution that that slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. It's a fact. So anniversaries give us an opportunity. It is history delivering itself at our door and saying, here I am, I'm a package. And you open the package of the anniversary, as we know, whether you want to or not. It's in your body. The clocks are ticking. And you may never, ever know. You may know people who, like you said, you were surprised. Wait, it is 400 years. It doesn't matter whether you know this consciously, we know it unconsciously. So it has this splendid internal, external validity in the deepest sense of those phrases. And so it creates a possibility of a conversation that we rarely have the opportunity to have. And as you said, being able to bring place identity and place attachment into the conversation and say, so what is this place like for you? Creates wonderful conversations that escape the usual rhetorical traps, which are all too frequent. I was at an event on Saturday where a black guy was reading poetry, and then he happened to say that he homeschools his kids so he can teach them about white people, and the white women in the audience had to reflexively say, why do you have to retreat? That's not good for you. And they were off to the races. Except I said, we're not having this conversation. That's a dead-end conversation. But the conversation that this anniversary creates the possibility for is not a dead-end conversation. It's a new conversation. Because this moment in history is new. And it's new for all of us. And it comes at a moment of deep crisis. We do need to figure out how do we go forward. We need to envision. The young Swedish girl who, at 15 years old, has been protesting in front of the parliament, said that we need to go beyond the blueprint, and this is a time for cathedral thinking. And I think this anniversary offers us a space for cathedral thinking. And it's our hope that you will all, with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers, with your patients, with whomever you please, take a moment to observe the anniversary on your time and in your own way. We think it will be a great blessing and will help us collectively do the cathedral thinking we need to do. We don't need to save the planet. As I say, the planet is going to be fine. We need to save our species. But I would really appreciate it if we did that. So thank you so much for coming.